it's Mel again. One of the most common questions that we get, because we're parents of multiple children, is the question of how do you divide up your time and all of the teaching between several different children that are all learning like at slightly different levels. Um, Obviously, this isn't something that really works in a traditional classroom, like in the brick and mortar schools where they have everybody essentially divided up according to their age group, and everybody in the age group is presumed to be operating at approximately the same level. So they get to learn all of the same subjects at all of the same times. Now, obviously, that doesn't work super great. Like, there are definitely in that same classroom with 30 or so students, there's always going to be kids that are like on the higher end of the spectrum where they are just picking up on the material very quickly. And then there's those students that are lagging behind. It's taking longer for it to click or for them to memorize whatever needs to be memorized, that kind of stuff. So, not all of those kids are going to be operating at the same level all of the time, especially not across all subjects all at the same time. So this is something that is like, it sounds intimidating, but it's not necessarily impossible to do. One thing that I've found pretty helpful for me is that we group up for certain subjects. Like, everybody is on a different, reading level at this point. They're on slightly different math levels at this point and that kind of thing. So, like, we do have to divide them up at least some of the time. But I've found that for certain things like history or geography or science, that kind of stuff, it actually works fairly well, for me at least, to teach everybody essentially the same lesson each time. So, like, all of us, for example, will be doing life science in a year, or all of us will be doing like an anatomy unit study. But my expectations for like what the child is supposed to turn in, what kind of work they're supposed to do, what level of memorization they get, and how deep they go into the subject, that's all going to change depending on what level they are at. So, I have a 12-year-old who's in like middle school level now, but I also have like way down on the other end of the spectrum, like a first grader who, and a kindergartner. The kindergartner is there for the experience, and she's going to absorb whatever she can that's on her level. And I try to present the material in a fairly simple way for them. But my middle schooler is going to be required to do much more memorization. She's going to need to know more detail in terms of, like, let's say we were speaking about the digestive system one day. I would expect her to know a lot of the parts of the human body and how it functions and that kind of thing. But the younger kid, they're not going to remember a lot of it. They're going to know like the main parts, and they're probably going to remember how nutrition works. So I would also include like nutrition lessons concurrently with the science and anatomy lessons. And that works. And I can ask them tailored questions. I can do small quizzes and that kind of thing. I can even ask my older students to give me a paper on whatever they learned. But I'm not going to be asking my first grader or my kindergartner to turn in a paper, obviously. So I try to group them together where I can. I've also got like a couple of kids, like my older two kids are a little more similar in terms of like reading level and math level, so sometimes I will teach them together. Then my middle two are on a similar level in terms of their reading and spelling, so I tend to group them together. And then I also make time for my kindergarten and preschool kids that are still more at the play to learn stage, and I'll try to incorporate at least some time for each of them during the day. One of the other things that I've found beneficial, that was actually initially my husband's idea, was to allow the older children to teach the younger ones. So one thing that I really, really enjoyed that's different from how a public school would run it is how we gauge our level of mastery. of a subject. So like for instance, in school, traditionally you would do your unit and you take the test and you get your A, hopefully, at the end, and then you check it off and you're done. And you may get bits and pieces of that incorporated into whatever subject you move on to, but you're essentially done. For my kids, you don't move on from a subject until you can demonstrate to me or to my husband some level of mastery where you can explain what it is that you've learned. And for us, that means either we're going to have conversations about it and you're going to give me a paper or whatever, or it can mean you present that material, like in an actual presentation, to your younger siblings. And that's not necessarily judging based on whether or not the younger sibling understands everything from the lesson, but I do want them to be able to just hand the knowledge on in some kind of coherent way. I also do incorporate that into like smaller lessons where I have a kindergartner who's finally learning her letters and putting the letters together with sounds and stuff like that. So she's at a really sweet spot for doing like beginning phonics, which all of my older kids know already. So all of them are capable of teaching her, at least in some way, of working with her in some way on that. So we have a few ready-made materials that requires very little prep work from me, and I can just hand it off to a kid, a sibling, who enjoys spending time with their younger sister, and they can kind of make it into a game where she is learning and they're learning how to teach. And I'm not expecting them to be like on parent level for sure, but they're able to give her some kind of experience to keep her moving forward, even if I, at the time, have to be working with somebody else who really does need my help. So that's at least a few of the ways that we make it work at our house, because reasonably, yeah, like a one-room schoolroom is what we do, essentially, but you do have to be able to tailor it to like whatever learning levels you're dealing with, and it can be tricky sometimes. So I just wanted to share a few tips for you if it works. All right.